Welcome to TradeTheNBA.com. This is John. This report is for the 24th, and well, we keep flirting right with this 50% line now. It's interesting. Yesterday, quite some interesting stuff. I mean, you had the record job losses, obviously. Now, under normal situation, anytime the government reports significant unemployment numbers, the market rallies on that because it means extra liquidity. I don't know that you can really add any more liquidity to what has been thrown at things. And things were going strong early on. And then we reached an interesting point, and we'll show it on the intraday chart. And just pretty much the wind got out of the sail. And this is something you're going to find with governmental support of market prices. They're not going to buy at every single little level in between. They're just going to pick the broad areas to support price at and provide a floor. Now, we've seen it at the 27.35 range, probably because they're looking for an average weighted somewhere around the 50% in general, just to kind of hold things at this particular point. It's been a slow build from there. The idea is that, okay, we'll get the economy started, and that will bolster confidence. But not happening, because I just was reading again today something I talked about that we should be looking out for. We had the other day where certain mortgage lenders were already reducing jumbo loans. Now we see today some banks are starting to reduce credit lines. Just the same thing that happened in '08, and that created a huge credit cycle. Now what they're starting is they're saying with new customers they're limiting credit lines. Well, it's going to start there, and then you move on to the next category, which is taking clients who've asked for forbearance on payments and freezing their credit lines, so to speak, and then it goes from there. So all justified, of course, even though they're still going to be receiving billions of dollars. From a NASDAQ standpoint, still better because it's at the 61% range. The ABM's in between here. It's not hard to follow the same category. We're still in general DOC weakness setup. The short-term buyer with the steel rising has been the basic support. But if we've got orange rising now, and if you get a fade of steel with already weak green and red here, that would put more downside pressure on the market, which will be interesting to see how that's absorbed. Shakeout-wise, we started out weak right here with the 405. If I can get that up just a little bit, you can see. And then it moved to 455, so that was an increase. And then today we're looking at pretty flat right now. So that could be a determinant as to whether or not we start making lower shakeouts, histograms, and continue. We've already been in a downturn from the yellow standpoint, and it's crossing below. So will that have a bit more of a sustained power? We're going to have to see, because there's going to be points where they're going to have to back off and allow the free flow of people exiting. Otherwise, it's just going to be a free-for-all for accepting all the cash from hedge fund players who just keep, toying with this back and forth, and they're just going to have a field day with it. Euro is still under pressure. Now we're below the line. They're going to really try and push back up to that, because it gets very critical down here. We know the Eurozone is completely gone. I mean, it's been a disaster. You already had the infighting between all the countries. You had no support for Italy. Now Italy's turning into a Greece situation. Are they going to bail them out? Not. And it's just a disaster for all of them one way or another. It's not even now about trading, because there really isn't much trade going on, period. That's effectively done. The same situation with oil here. We're still going to get to a point where as contracts end, there's going to be a lot of negative turnaround for oil in that, which is an amazing thing. The historic times that we exist in. The real question is how much pushback do we get on lockdowns? Because at the end of the day, and I think they forget this, is there was, even with the lockdown, the whole population is still going to get exposed and infected. That was never the question. The only point of a lockdown or any kind of restriction was to slow the rate of infection so that you didn't overwhelm the hospitals. Something got messed up along the way of that thinking, And it became this all out, we have to save everybody. You can't. The virus will hit everyone. Now, you can certainly keep those at most risk away from, situations, but wow, they've gone off the rails. It's not even a practical solution what they've been working. And now, of course, we have the articles of people just refusing to go to work. So people have received the PPP money for their businesses, and they tell their employees, "Oh, you can come back." And they're like, "Well, why would we want to? We're getting more than 100% of our pay by sitting at home." And can you imagine that? So unemployment is actually paying more than their jobs. And guess what? People don't want to work when that happens. Go figure. Cold, it's nowhere to go but up at this particular point. We're going to have to talk about that one. All right, looking at it from an intraday, it was quite interesting because we had a lot of rocky behavior. We ended up with some really clean buys, though. From the Power Mo, you can see we have our up pivots. And you get that little up-down cross going right there. You've got a very bullish signal. Finally turned out you also ended up with the cyan under red DOC. But that did turn around quite quickly. But you had the maintaining of the rise in the Azure here of the Power Mo. Even though red DOC was kind of like, it was holding its own above -7, but it really wasn't as clean as seeing it from the Power Mo, and even it was a little better than the shakeout was, because the shakeout didn't start to turn around for a few more bars later, even though we're still in consolidation, so you could have picked up anywhere along those range. And then we skyrocketed. Now, we were talking about this as we were starting to get some of these magentas, and I wasn't expecting a whole lot of, when I get a magenta and I've got a full reset below -13.5, where's my steel got to go? Straight up. And that's just long-term buyers. I mean, short-term buyers are just going to be able to sustain it. And the idea is then they're looking for that turnaround. So that's where I usually look at these cross points where steel crosses red, is red about to pivot and make the turn. If it's not, usually you get a little bit more of an extended move. But if it does begin to turn immediately after, you get this exact kind of configuration where it turns around. And it was interesting because we were ending up with these big sigma events, which was suggesting that it would be outside a normal range move, and it was pretty good. But then we got to right in between our two ranges, the 2830, 2817, and that was interesting because it couldn't hold the 2830 there. We ended up with this magenta. It was fighting back and forth, and it looked like it was going to turn around. We ended up with the pivot there. We had a decent pivot, and then boom, next bar after it sort of fell apart on that because it just couldn't get a turnaround move of the red DOC with all the crosses and that. And that led to just a little bit more. And then, of course, the expectation was, well, they're still going to try and bring it back to the highs. And I think they tried to here, but ran into that 2830, which there just really wasn't enough buy interest to propel things. And that's when it started to fall apart a little bit. And then you get some of these really nice signals here. We get the red below, white, you get the green crossing, you have steel coming from above, crossing cyan below, and then also the orange crossing up above. I always like those, and they're good. And you can see, without that dip below the red line, a much stronger move to the downside. So that always becomes an interesting one. Whenever I see that, I usually get pretty excited. I'll usually go overweighted on those situations because it tends to give you a better return. Same signal, exactly right here. Differences below the red crosses, and you can see much shorter. It still worked down after a little while, but it wasn't as that clean, dramatic drop. It's nice and powerful. But this is the kind of wave action that you're going to get when you have participants who are just there to support certain areas, and then people react off those areas, and they just happen to correspond to previous algos we've talked about. We had the 2794 from before. I think it was a member stuff that called for that one way back when it was above 28 plus, and then we came back and revisited that the next day, and then we've been bouncing around this area for some time. So clearly they've decided that this is a pretty good range in that 50% return. But again, this is going to really depend on how some of these rollouts go, if they're effective. This idea of social distancing in restaurants and some of these other things, I just don't see the practicality of how some of this stuff works. And again, at the end of the day, until you test people for these antigens and find out exactly how much of the population has been infected, the promising aspect of that is we're finding that a large percentage of the population has already contracted or has antibodies that reflect that they've already had it, which is good, because the closer you get to herd immunity, but you got to be in the 70 to 90% range of people having been exposed before you get to that. But so in this particular case, the key is, what treatments do you have to keep people out of the hospitals? And this is where the chloroquine and some of those other ones that, if given early in the setup, reduce the symptoms enough that you don't end up in the hospital. So it's going to stop you from getting sick. But the whole idea is just like a regular flu. Hey, if you feel bad for a few days, you can take a few days off and get back to it. The problem has been that it has an outside negative effect on elderly, and that's sad and problematic. But at least we can end the camp that says that this is the same as the normal flu. It never was. Even long before, when I saw it come through Italy and everyone was telling me it's all made up. And it wasn't made up. This has a very serious viral component, and it does cause significant problems for a certain class of population, and they die. And that's horrible. You don't see this with a regular flu. And now we've already eclipsed the number of deaths for a regular flu in just a matter of a couple of months. So this hasn't even been around for a full year or whatever, and it's already eclipsed the number. So at least that those people can stop with that, and you can realize that, yes, this is a little bit more severe. It's problematic. It's a no-win. It's what I've been saying from day one. But all we can do is move forward. And currently right now, we're at the 2794 and looking strong here with that Azure above the 13 and rising. And it's pretty clean from that setup return here with the pivot. So I really enjoyed looking at those Azure pivots as they come through at these key points, give you the double cross right there, signals it and says, okay, let's begin. And there it goes. So that's all good stuff. As always, I will be off and on the Skype chat because I'm continuing to program and making adjustments to like these situations where I have a reading that starts out decent and then at a certain midpoint in between ends out just not producing. So like when you end up with the start of a spider, it's not a problem here as long as I have my Azure rising, but once that started to fail, it's like boom, and that's where these need to then convert and move to my short setup and turn into the red, and that will just keep it a little bit closer, well-defined. As to which, because this is the reality. A lot of times these will start out as, yes, it was the correct signal, perfect situation. They start to make a move, and they just don't have enough juice to continue to push it, and it turns. And you just want to be able to identify that on the 5K charts quicker and have it flip over color-wise so that it's pretty clean. As always, we'll talk again later. Have a great weekend. Trade well.